Listeners, what follows is a talk with Zedeck Siew as part of our Gauntlet Community Open Gaming Weekend. This is a rough audio. We've done a round of cleanup on it, but it is not an edited version. Be aware that at about the 27-minute mark, we have a technical issue, which means that after that, it's a second half that we recorded a couple of days later. Hello, my name is Lowell, pronouns he, him, and this is a talk that we're doing as part of our Gauntlet Community Open Gaming Weekend. But more that we had the opportunity to speak to somebody who's doing amazing work. So we have Zedeck Siew, who is the author of Thousand Islands, which is a series of zines, both locational material and also inspirational drawings, and it just a really amazing set of things, as well as Creatures of Near Kingdoms, which is a beautiful book. And then there's some other there's a book on weaving and on food plants. That there's just lots of great stuff that's going. Zedeck, thank you so much for coming here to talk with us.
Yeah, thrilled to be here. Sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add to the lovely introduction is that a lot of my work is in collaboration with so many other people. Like the sort of cookbook and the weaving book that you mentioned are actually things that we've had the pleasure to host on our web store, but they are the artists and creators who work with sort of indigenous communities. Creatures of New Kingdoms is a collaboration with the artist Sharon Chin, who is my partner who I'm living with. And A Thousand Islands is, you mentioned the sort of inspirational art. Visual Artist Macau was the one who began the project. So I've been collaborating. It's more accurate to say that I've been collaborating with him. Yeah. So I just wanted to acknowledge.
Oh no, I think that's so good to know. We're going to talk about the Kickstarter project in a second that they have it, but with the zines, what is your process with Moon Cow? Is he doing the art and then you're presenting to you, or is there some discussion back and forth? What's that creation process like for you?
So it often is I'm not sure how it works with other kinds of collaborations, but basically when I work with other people, it's more of like, here's my stuff. You sit with it for however long it takes you to do things and come back to me, and vice versa. So how the zines often begin is that either Manka or I will have a sort of idea or get struck by an image, and then on my part, because I work with text, I'll write notes. On his part, he'll start creating images. So when we bring it to the other, it either tends to be sort of like a sort of rough bullet point document with like snippets of like phrases or descriptions, or like about it, like a JPEG, like sort of folder full of JPEGs, dozen JPEGs. So Manka would have created these images and would have some notes about what he was thinking about when he was creating those images. So yeah, I mean, like they always come from. It's always you. I always find myself at a loss to answer like where certain things come from, because they obviously come from a sort of layered sort of like a. I always use the word compost because the ideas always come from from many different inputs, but often, at least for the 1,000 Island zines, there are often specific points of inspiration. So for like for Anjang zine, I think Marco started sketching because of a dream his mother had while staying in sort of a holiday bungalow up in the hills, about having her blood sucked by a tick. So yeah, that's kind of like, it really is quite personal. The zines come from quite personal places.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Do you find that you have some ideas and the bigger themes are emergent as you're writing along, or do you kind of are some of them like so set that like you want to do this thing and then it kind of works from there?
I think very much the former. Because we do try. So even though 1,000 Islands is quite I mean, it began and still is a research project, in that a lot of the art and a lot of the text is inspired by the stuff that we read in various sort of like ethnographies and like sort of academic sources and whatnot. It always begins from a like sort of a personal something. So I guess we talk about it quite dismissively in terms of like we like trivia.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this particular detail in this book about boat building that so one of the scenes is Corvu, and it's a sort of like sort of sea maritime setting, but really there is a specific image that it comes from, which is from a book about Kelantanese boat building, which is there is a sort of ritual procession in that state at the beginning of the rainy season or the monsoon, where everybody comes out to dance in the rain. And yeah, the zine is about like the zine has broader themes like relationships to time, to weather, to sort of the vagaries of the sea and like living in relationship to those geographies. But yeah, it develops in the writing and ultimately springs from like these very specific images. So like no, so I guess if the question was, this is the colonialism zine, or
Mm-hmm.
this is the rebelling against authority zine, or like this is the yeah, we never work in themes in that way.
Okay.
Yeah. They do arise organically.
So we'll come back to talk about the zines some more because they're just amazing. They're beautiful things, and just a pleasure to look through, to read through in a way that I don't think a lot of modern RPG materials are. But so you have a project that's coming up
Yes.
that is going to be on Kickstarter. And this is Reach of the Roach God. So why don't you tell us about what that is?
Okay, so Reach of the Roach God is our first book as part of the 1,000 Islands project. So it is quite a, both like everybody involved in it, it's quite anxious because we've never really done it before. But yes, so it is also our first adventure book, because the zines are often gazetteers in that they describe or are an exploration of a particular place or culture or geography. So Reach of the Roach God has specific adventures. So they're still system neutral. So they are not tied to any particular RPG system, but they are scenarios. So it'll be a collection of these 3 scenarios that will be connected in the sense that they all eventually lead underground. and they all eventually end up with prospective adventurers meeting or encountering or having to deal with the Roach God. Yeah, so that's a long ass elevator pitch, but
no, but it's great.
Yeah, so it's cave themed in the sense that like for Southeast Asia has a lot of sort of caverns, a lot of cave systems, and some of them are quite large and quite deep. So yeah, we are kind of inspired by those places.
And I saw on the description of the upcoming project that you're going to have a more full campaign to kind of connect things.
Correct.
And so what are you imagining for that? What is that going to look like?
So it is a kind of so there are these three sort of scenarios that are kind of openings, and they eventually lead into so basically we're trying to create a book which would have three, the zines are gazetteers.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be three of these gazetteers in the book. So you would I guess people would use it in the sense that you play through one of the adventures and then go and be led into a sort of a underworld.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this is our Underdark book.
Okay.
Right?
With less of the racism of it, so
yeah. Yeah, so there'll be cultures underground which then would function very much like the zines that we tend to do already, but they will be slightly more structured. So there'll be the campaign, I guess, would be lots of random tables and lots of ideally, and this sort of this is related to how the sort of structure of the campaign, the funding campaign is ideally the book will include like a fairly robust sort of cavern generation system, or so you create particular areas or particular regions of the underworld, and then populate them with these cultures. So yeah, that's the campaign, I guess. And one of these cultures is the Roach people.
Okay.
So yeah.
And so this is kind of a toolkit. Then you've got these pieces, and then a toolkit for connecting this together. I'm very excited about that, because one of the singular pleasures of reading through your zines is the evocative tables that you have. Every single one of them has, like, there are no duds in any of those entries. Every single one of them is a piece that you want to see and play, you want to have at the table, from NPCs to objects to items. It's just so strong throughout.
Thank you. They're very, like, I have a love-hate relationship making them, because they do take the longest. Because it is one of those things where to make a good random table, you kind of have to imagine a full, I guess a full scenario, or basically how would this one entry be played out. And I guess from the curator's point of view, you've got to have that in your mind before you put it down. I mean, the reader, I don't think the end reader really sees it overtly, but I am convinced that if you don't do that, the table is less alive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, it's irritating to write, because like, you're throwing away lots of work in that sense, because none of the work ends up in the table overtly. Yeah.
So for the Kickstarter campaign, uh, like, have you started to think about stretch goals or what you're imagining? Like, what kind of team are you putting together for the project?
So we're trying to keep it to relatively small. So the team basically will not grow with any of the stretch goals. So it will just be me writing the text and uh, Mankao making the images.
Mm-hmm.
We have a third person on our team, Grace Wong, who is managing the project and also doing editing and sort of running the kind of like, I guess she's our manager, project
Uh-huh.
manager. Um, we also, so like the way we structured it is that the sort of like the base funding goal is kind of like this is what a bare bones Reach of the Roach God will look like. So it will be um, it will not be as fancy. It will be missing some of the bestiary. We plan to do a bestiary. We plan to do sort of like a cavern generation, but those are tied to stretch goals. So like the base funding goal is right. Okay, here's the book with the adventures and the sort of gazetteers. And with that, you would be able to use it already, but some of the sort of more colorful bits and bobs and toys might not be there. Hi, my name is Leonard Ferris, and welcome to Cardio Intervals. Sorry. This workout
That's
is all
okay.
about changing your tempo. And yeah, so in terms of stretch goals, it's just sort of making the book nicer. We do want like the sort of ratio of art to text in the zines. We do want it for the book.
Mm-hmm.
So at a certain level, Mankao will be able to spend, basically will be able to spend more time to make more images. And yeah, it will really be an art book that kind of has, so we were thinking like the ideal Reach of the Roach would basically be an art book like you'd buy an art book for a film or a RPG but it will have usable stuff in the art book. One of the other stretch goals also is like we want to get, because Mankao and like I don't do layout at all, and Mankao is the layout. He does all the layout in the zines already, and I mean it works, and it works. He does have a good visual eye, but we are thinking of bringing aboard some of our friends who run a sort of design studio.
Mm-hmm.
They're called Huruf, and they're a Malaysian-based design studio. We've already gotten them to create a sort of like typography for, so the font that you see in some of the images for the campaign, that's the font for 1,000 Nights going forward. Yeah.
It seems like a really smart approach. You're valuing your work in a strong way. I'm glad to see that that you're taking that approach.
So like we one of the create, like going for Kickstarter or running a crowdfunding campaign is giving us anxiety attacks every
Mm-hmm.
because it's not only the usual stresses of Kickstarter, but also because being based in Malaysia, there are sort of like logistical and sort of like basically technical and material sort of hurdles to jump through. Kickstarter doesn't support projects from Malaysia, so fortunately, Mankao has roots in Singapore, and that's how. So the project technically is funded via his bank account in Singapore. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's all those like little workarounds that I guess if I were somebody who was coming to it without like without personal involvement in the project, it wouldn't mean much to me. But it's all the background stuff. Yeah, so we're just trying to limit the amount of. So that's why we're not trying to ask guest writers. In an ideal world, we would want to, but it's just too much of a risk.
Right. We've spoken with Jamila Najati about his challenges in working out of the Philippines and having to work with Jason Pete on the Once More Into the Void project. So yeah, I don't think people are necessarily aware of. They see Kickstarter as this big piggy bank, but how limited it is for people in a lot of regions of the world.
In Southeast Asia, Kickstarter only supports projects based in Singapore.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so not from the Philippines, not from Indonesia, if I recall correctly, and not from Malaysia.
That is wild. Let me go back to kind of Thousand Islands for a bit. It's been out there for a long time. You've been doing these brilliant books with setting materials, and then you have the Hattu book. That's. Can you talk about that and what kind of inspired you to do sort of related things that speak to maybe who you are and where you're from?
So I mean that's just a happy sort of coincidence, because it really isn't technically, or wasn't conceived technically as part of 1,000 Islands. I already had written it before we started working together, Mankau and I, and said, "Hey, I've got this thing," and so I got him to draw the images. So it was basically a separate collaboration we were doing. It's like, okay, so we're making these zines now. Why not just make this part of that? So yeah, I mean, we've justified it in the sense that these are kind of appendices, which then has made it possible for us to include like Creatures of Near Kingdoms or Mad Weave or like Recalling Forgotten Tastes. These references and sort of further reading material that kind of underpin where we are coming from with 1,000 Islands. So
yeah, I think they're great. They're additional sources that illuminate when you then go back to the other sort of more conventional parts of the series. They're really strong, really good.
Yeah, I'm glad people seem to think so. I am very proud of Hattu because it feels very. I guess I'm very pleased when something that is very specific to a particular context. In the case of Hattu, it is about a very particular Southeast Asian or particular Malaysian sort of tenor of ghost story, and have lots of people relate to it. So yeah, that's.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about kind of related to that. One, like your sort of sources and inspiration and influences growing up in general, and then maybe talk about your experiences in gaming.
Okay. Sorry, could you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Maybe you could talk about like your general influences, your experience,
right,
fiction, media, and so on, and then we'll talk about like your experiences in gaming.
Wow, it's so hard to sort of. I guess I can talk about. So like a thing that I grew up with, which sort of infuses the work, specifically 1,000 Islands, is So in as much as the work is informed by all these sort of ethnographies and sort of historical sources, it really comes from the sort of lived experiences that Mankar and I have living here. Um, and like very, very specifically for Hattu, for example, but also generally are these sort of tabloid magazines that I used to grow up with. They were in Bahasa Melayu. And I guess the equivalent that sort of equivalent Western touchstone would be like sort of tabloid news of the world, kind of like my grandmother was a crocodile, sort of kind of stories. And yeah, like it's like, okay, it may be bogus, but because of the way we relate to sort of the supernatural, it doesn't sound that far-fetched. It sounds backward because in Southeast Asia, it's aspirational to be Western and sort of be rational. But come hungry ghost month, everybody keeps indoors. Even though you might have your smartphone and you might be arguing about whatever discourse or so on and so forth. Yeah, so it's these stories. There was this one magazine in particular which I used to buy regularly, called Mastika, which towards the end of its publication sort of life, it only ended publication like a couple of years ago, but it had been running for decades, and it began as a sort of very literary magazine during the time of Malaysia's independence. So it was it was the magazine that intelligentsia or the nascent intelligentsia would buy and read. And then as the years progressed, it just became more and more tabloidy. Sorry, that's a bit of its history, which I love. Yeah, and then towards the end, you always had like a drawing of a ghost on the cover, and like, oh, this person who was buried, his corpse is all rotting, and like, those kinds of stories.
So where my stupidity, my household failure cut us off, we were talking about your gaming history,
right?
And you mentioned starting with, I think, 4E,
fifth edition.
Fifth edition. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So talk about what that was like coming into it. You said that you kind of weren't expecting to be playing.
It was more like so basically I had read and looked at role-playing game books before. It was always really cool to have things like to flip through, like, campaign settings like Planescape or Dark Sun, or more often it was the bestiaries, so it was all the monster manuals. But yeah, we started playing when when people in my friend circle, like one of them, this guy had played like Dungeons and Dragons when he was Nuning. So he said, "Hey, there's this new edition of this game called Dungeons and Dragons. You guys want to try it out?" And that's how we started playing.
So did you move? I mean, do you feel yourself as more of a GM, more of a player now, or have you kind of moved to, I just want to be creating?
So after we first started playing like this 5th edition campaign, I got really into it. So I started looking at the PBTA sort of games, right? So Dungeon Duel and all the rest of the Apocalypse War hacks. And I really got into like role-playing game design stuff. I guess now you would call it. I mean, there's a whole kind of world with regards to whether
Uh-huh.
system matters or system doesn't matter. But I really was a system matters person. I
Oh
was
yeah, that.
really. Um, I got heavily into uh like the one of the first Kickstarters I backed was I think it was a reprint of Burning Wheel.
Mm-hmm.
And I really so like I wanted to try these sort of like heavily mechanized systems out. Yeah, so I got into that quite a bit for a year or two, and then very quickly burnt out. I mean, it was I think it was indicative of. I mean, it was foreshadowing the fact that none of my real life player group wanted to play with Burning Wheel. They looked at the book and like, oh, okay, but this is a lot of work for before we can get to the fun. Yeah, so there was this, and then I swung into sort of the old school stuff, which is where I am now.
Mm-hmm. I will say my wife had exactly that reaction to Burning Wheel when I got a copy of it, and I was like, "Oh, look at all these details, and
Yeah,
when you argue, you have to go through all these little things." And
it's so clever. It's so like, oh, look at um how I guess I'm probably sure I used the word elegant, or um, how well designed it was.
mm-hmm.
And it was just, I guess now I realize it was just too designed to the point where like why? Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So
we've got a couple of people in the community who are still big Burning Wheel advocates, and I love that they found what they want out of that game.
mm,
And I think that's great, and they've certainly gotten great sessions out of it. But it's not doing what I want at the table.
no, and I don't want to, and I guess I should disclaim what I'm saying. And like I'm not trying to like the whole thing about the sort of system matters, system doesn't matter kind of words that nobody is saying system doesn't matter. Um, and where I've always fallen is that play the system that you want to play, and there's no single right way. I think the only thing that I would, because I was such a Luke Crane fan for those
Mm-hmm.
number of years, is that the idea that this is the this is what game design is, and the orthodoxy involved in saying that if you're not playing this well-designed game, you're playing a inferior experience is just not true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember some of the things that Crane said about hacks and things back in the day. Um, you know, we've always said here is that yes, system matters, but play culture, what
Hmm.
you at that table matters more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, at what point did you go kind of from that transition of moving from there, moving to OSR to going, I really want to write something that is effectively systemless?
Right. So I think it was, so I can trace my, like, oh, I want to really do this. I was always very kind of interested in writing an RPG thing. Like I was before I started writing what I'm doing now was like sort of like experimenting, trying to, because uh I began as a sort of a fiction writer. So it's like, oh, I want to write sort of like choose your own adventure sort of pieces of prose or whatever. But the point where I said, hey, I want to write RPG stuff was discovering Patrick Stewart's blog. And I can pinpoint the exact uh, post on
Mm-hmm.
his blog. It was a read through of a book called The Art of Not Being Governed by James Scott, I believe.
Hmm.
And it's a book about the Zomia region in sort of mainland Southeast Asia. So in the region of Burma and like uh, interior Thailand, and sort of that area of the world, it's a mountainous area that has been known to be kind of like on the in the interior of these nation states, and they are kind of they've kind of the way society functions there is kind of resistant to the ideas of nation states. So tribal identity is very fluid. People don't necessarily identify as Burmese or Thai or whatever else. So it's just a very interesting book. But Patrick's post was like taking details about like of from the book and sort of saying, hey, how do I use this in the game, or how would this look if I put it in the campaign? So it was just really interesting because for both like the way because Patrick was such a central figure in the sort of old school movement, the way creators would sort of use the sort of most random inspirations and sort of like I was just super inspired by the way imaginations would spin forth new material from what is not definitely not a conventionally nerd sort of source. Obviously, the specific topic of the book was also like it's about the book was about Southeast Asia, and I'm from Southeast Asia. So yeah, I was just really inspired. Yeah, and it was not a post about like how many hit points would a monster have. It was just what kind of stories can we tell. So that was, to answer your question, the lack of that really solidified for me that the idea of the question, what kind of stories can we tell with at a RPG table? That's design. Design is not this monster has how many HD or like armor class and how many like what's your social conflict subsystem. That's design too, but design is also as much as, you know, what is the story? How can you express this idea in the most concise way possible, in the most imaginative way possible? Yeah.
So let me then come back to a thousand islands. Like, if you had to point to a few of the pieces or ideas, or even of the zines, what would you say are the ones that you go back to, that you think about the most, or that you're most proud of?
The like specific things in the zines.
Yeah, I'm just curious about, when you write something and you're thinking about the whole spectrum of it, what are the ones you're like, I'm really happy with how that came out, or I really hope people look at this because I think this is something really interesting.
I think a thing I find difficult is that I can rarely quote like I can barely remember what are in the zines.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah.
Once I write it, it's out. Okay, that's yay, it's done. Like, but I guess I am really pleased with the sort of one of like our second zine, Crutching, is about cats. And I think I was really pleased with that, and it's kind of set the sort of tone going forward about fluidity or porousness. In Crutching, there's a town, and their sort of patron god is a cat, right? A cat who, and interspersed in the zine are like sort of like sort of stories or fables that are told about this god. And the central figure is a change, like, so the god Or, which is the name of this cat god, is in one story a he, and in one story a she. It's in one story a human being, it's in one story a cat. And I really think that is a kind of microcosm to the sort of thing that we have been trying to do with the zines as a whole. The idea that especially since in RPGs, they're like bestiary is always written quite taxonomically.
Mm-hmm.
A creature is a magical beast or an animal or what's the word, aberration or things like that. And the thing about how, I don't want to speak universally, but at least the sort of the way stories function in the region where, in my context, is that what is the difference between a god and a powerful wizard and a powerful spirit and or a demon? Like, it's a matter of perspective, really. And often, even in one culture who worships a god, like the god is not has many faces, many aspects. So yeah, I guess I'm pretty proud of that.
There's so much good stuff in Kuching. You leave so much imaginative space for the reader. There's something in there that has always struck me, is there's the moment when we have those two assassin cats have returned.
Right.
And you just mentioned that they're assassin cats. But you don't tell us, okay, how are they assassins? Like what we know they've gone out and done this thing, but you don't explain how a cat can be an assassin or any of that. And it's so good. Like, it's so fruitful for the GM to think about that and to start spinning off those stories and consistently throughout your zines, you're leaving those opportunities for the game master.
I think I mentioned like in our previous session, how, like, you write a random table, you kind of have to figure out every line where that story is going, and I think that applies to the zines in general. So, like, the thing about the assassin cats is, like, by the way, they are literally inspired by Mankau's cats. So, like, he drew them based on his own cats. But yeah, like, so there's a thing, and there is a very loose implication that they were trained by the sort of like secret, like, order of like cat ninjas that are part of that place. But yeah, I mean, like, so, like, as creators, or like people, Manka and I, are thinking about where these questions go, but what we choose to put inside the zine has, like, I don't want to, put more than I need to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the ideal thing, because especially because the project is really about the art, or at least for me, it's the art is half of the reason why the zines are as good as they are. And so that ratio of, like, the visual and the little text, like, it is giving the image the space to breathe. And I think as people, as GMs or players, like, I trust that GMs and players, they have the best imaginations, after all. The zines are an aid. Like, if people are using the zines to play, they're not playing my vision. They are playing their imagination with fuel from the zines. So yeah.
So, have you heard back from people about how they've used your zines or gotten what's the kind of things? What's the most interesting reactions, responses, feedback that you've gotten from folks?
I think one of the first, one of the first people to actually get in touch saying that, hey, I used your zine in with my home group and we really enjoyed it was Tomer G, who I think he posted his hacks or like sort of notes on how he was running his game on the sort of Gauntlet forums. It was I think I think he used Fall of Magic
Mm-hmm.
as a sort of like systemic backbone to play through Merkriger, the crocodile scene. So yeah, I mean, and that was really cool because obviously I'd written the zines to imagining how I would use them, and I tend to enjoy and play sort of old school D&D sort of games. But it was really, I mean, it was really gratifying to see Tomir play them using sort of this more narrative systems. So yeah, I mean that really reinforced the form. Like, so it really is important that they remain sort of neutral in terms of system or rule set. Yeah. So yeah, I'm and then you hear people using them for their D&D campaigns and yeah, I'm always really like the most recent story I had, like somebody got in touch. So like his home group, like his name is Jason, and he's Australian, and he's
Mm-hmm.
part of the Aboriginal sort of like community, and he's making his home group is set in a sort of like Pacific Island slash. It's basically a sort of inspired by Jason's Space to Southeast Asia, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm always, and that was really gratifying also because it was people are using the zines for their own imaginations of their own context. Yeah.
So let me ask this, and I ask this as a super white dude from the most Western Midwest US kind of thing. Like, how much has the colonial experience and the I know that in Malaysia you've had waves of different colonial masters. I've talked to Jamie about the Philippines and just how absolutely ignorant we are about the nature of those different colonial masters and what happened there. How much has that informed, or do you want that to inform what you're doing?
Well, like I don't know. So I guess it's up to the people who up to you and anybody else that's listening to sort of make up their minds about whether we are like our work is entirely a reaction or not. Uh, Obviously, colonialism permeates my lived experience. I live in a town called Port Dickson. It's named after Alfred Dixon, the sort of like British era sort of colonial official.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the region of the world I live in, Southeast Asia, is literally defined by that term comes from American foreign policy. It was a World War II era term, and we've all the idea that we are peripheral to the metropoles illustrates how immediate colonialism uh, is in our daily life. So like what with A Thousand Islands, what Mangkao and I wanted to do was make a thing that was inspired by well, I guess I have to start by this sort of describing what the like Malaysia, the popular sort of ideas or our popular imagination of our past or our sort of history or myth history is entirely determined by post-colonial nationalism. So when I grew up with seeing the past as, oh, we were once a great Malay sultanate that was colonized by the Portuguese, conquered by the Portuguese, and it's been a struggle since then to sort of regain our identity. And that's the image of the Malay warrior and the singular sultanate is a nationalist construct that is entirely determined by a need to have a story of strength equal to the strength of the colonizers. Whereas there was no such sort of singular identity before the arrival of before the dawn of the colonial age. There's an incredible amount of porousness. Nobody really identified, and this is true throughout the world, nobody identified according to their the idea of like nationality is a modern idea. You see so much movement throughout the region. There was a Japanese quarter in the old Thai capital. There was a Malay quarter in the old Thai capital, and people identified to which city they lived in. Those cities didn't have borders. They were mandalas. So a center of power radiating outwards, and everybody had to basically live in negotiation with everybody else. I'm sort of getting lost in the weeds here of like what I'm trying to say.
No, but I think it's a perspective we don't have. So I appreciate you.
So the point is that it's not perspective that we have either. So I talked earlier, and I have talked before about this idea of the Malay warrior being the only image that I could imagine when I imagined our past. And a project like Thousand Islands is trying to reseed a garden that has laid barren, except for this one statue or this one image, because it's really important to have a garden. Like imagination is a garden, and our garden has been so barren for so long. And I want to say, I mean, there are many reasons why it has laid fallow for so long. Colonialism is one of the big reasons why. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me move from that to something we mentioned earlier in the first half, but we haven't really talked about that. You've got another a book,
Right.
the creatures of the near kingdoms.
Yes.
Near King. Tell us what that is.
So that predates Creatures in the Near Kingdoms. Actually predates my sort of RPG work.
Oh, really?
So I don't necessarily see it as a role-playing game thing, although people have used it and looked at it as one since. So it's basically because I loved monster manuals and bestiary so much, I wrote one.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first book. I made it with Sharon Chin, a visual artist who is my partner. And yeah, I wanted to write a novel, but thought that writing a novel would be too boring. And it really is a book about I always call it a sort of herbiary / bestiary of imaginary Southeast Asian animals and plants. But it really comes from sort of reconnecting with a sense of the, because our lives are so human centric, right?
Mhm.
And so about 10 years ago, I moved away from the capital city, Kuala Lumpur, to my hometown, Port Dickson. And in the moving, started just noticing other life more, like having a relationship to land, uh, seeing the sort of civet cats on the wire, having bats and sort of roosting in our eaves. We get snakes once in a while in the house, things like that. Just very little small things. Yeah, so the book is about having relationships to animals and plants, basically. And I see it as a political thing, uh, because, and this is kind of related to like what we were talking about earlier about nationalism and the imaginary idea that is nationalism. Like growing up, uh, I always thought of myself as Malaysian, and when you live in the capital, that's what you think of, and then that allows the breeding of, or I speak for places like East Malaysia, which has a very strained relationship to the center. I speak for I am Malaysian, so my identity also can speak for sort of Aboriginal sort of communities in Malaysia, of which there are many. Uh, so like moving back to Port Dickson and writing this book is a sort of reconnection to like, I am the person from this particular town in this particular state. I drink water from this particular river. And that's the kind of relationship I want. And it really dawned on me, like, I was thinking about things like when you tell a story, people talk about appropriation,
Mhm.
or um, like somebody else telling the story of a particular culture or place, or exploitation. You cut down a forest and the timber is exported elsewhere. And the thing about it is that cultural value is also the same thing. So with that book, it was always about, so I'm telling stories from this place, uh, and the book, I want a book to go places, but how does the value come back? So I was just thinking about that. Yeah, and we tried various ways to. So thoughts about that determined the form of the book. It's very affordable. Uh, Locally, it's 20 ringgit, which is, I think it's about $5, which is the average of what books are. Um, Sharon and I are both from the sort of art world scene. So like our first instinct was to make a really fancy sort of hardcover coffee table kind of art book. But the writing of it made us realize that we had to do it as softcover that people from our town could afford.
Hmm.
Things like that. Just very simple things about the sort of practical material realities of like making art. So the book is a particular price in Malaysia and a particular price abroad. So people who are buying it in USD are kind of like, what's the word? Subsidizing the. Yeah,
No,
I've seemed to have
that's
gone.
no. I think that's fair. There's been talk we've seen on RPG Twitter about valuation
Hmm.
uh, based on sources and region. That's something we don't talk about. So I think it's
Yeah, and it's great that those kind of those kind of thinking that kind of thinking can happen. I think there's a lot of recrimination or like, oh, you got to pay reparations or whatever, and sort of moral judgments about that. Whereas, like a thing that comes from somewhere should return to it. If you don't close the cycle, the thing is dead.
So let me ask, I mean, you talked last, the sort of first half of this about some of the research that you've done and sources. Let's say that somebody would like to follow the path and maybe learn more about Southeast Asian or Malaysian history or folklore or those kinds of things. Do you have some recommendations on where people ought to start?
Oh boy. I honestly cannot say.
Okay, that's fair.
Like, I can, because I'm very conscious about sort of telling non-Malaysians where to start. Like, I would have an answer for people who are from my context.
Okay.
I would just tell them I started with a book called Malay Magic, which is actually a bad place to start because it is a book that was written during the colonial age by a literal colonial administrator who was drinking buddies with all these sultans, and they would tell him basically stories about. So it was like such and such friends, such and such told me the story about how there was this person who was said to be a tiger and so like for me there's this idea that to me that there's a tone in the book of like a reading to it as a person who is not a colonial administrator. I feel like there is a sort of puckishness in the sense of like, we know that you want to hear exotic shit about our weird ass behaviors, so I'm going to just tell you some bullshit. And so like the stories are really colorful, but also, at least I don't know whether I'm reading into it, but also there's a sort of sense of you are trying to write ethnography, but I may not be telling. I don't want to write. I don't want to give you the ability to write something accurate. Yeah, so it's kind of hacking or jamming of the cultural of the colonial project, I feel. So, but I don't know whether I should recommend it to.
No, I think that's fair. There's a bunch of classics. I'm thinking of, is it Lafcadio Hearn, who wrote all the sort of Japanese like, and set the template for Japanese folklore and things in a way that felt very, oh, I've just gone and listened to your stories and I haven't done anything to really run them down or check or confirm or engage with the culture in a meaningful way.
Yeah, so I don't, beyond sort of saying that I don't know where people would start. A Thousand Islands, the web store, like one of the things that Maka and I wanted to do was sort of host specific reference books that might be difficult for people to get because they're sort of small press publications. So like the sort of book about weaving or a book about Orang Asli sort of cuisine is what like that's currently on the stores are those, but I don't think those are good, or maybe they are. They're definitely not overviews. I guess why I'm struggling with this question is that I can't recommend a sort of general overview guide to my context because I've never used a guide like that. Like I don't know which tourist book to recommend.
Yeah, I think that there's no magic bullet in this, and I think that's a fair response to that. Let me ask you a kind of a weird question here. And this goes back to the Roach God and to some of your other things. One of the things I've noticed in that is maybe a different relationship to the natural world of insects and such. I mention that because in are, very Western, Eurocentric. Insects and bugs are always treated as the most inhuman or the most alien kind of thing. Very much a whole set of tropes and images around that. And I don't know if I'm hitting, but it feels like the approach to that kind of class of animals and those ideas feels different in the material that
Right.
you're working with. I don't know if that's a personal thing or a thing you find is a cultural touchstone.
I think so specifically about insects, I'm not sure whether I mean like we don't like insects either. I mean like I don't think it's a and they're quite not like us, so
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to. I think there is a difference in relation to the natural world, or at least I feel like there's a difference that is markedly or that is distinct from sort of Western, and it is related to the what we were talking about earlier about taxonomies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in the the idea that there are people like elephants are people. It's very it's quite common in sort of like story like sort of folklore stories and or like just cultural ideas about like a friend of mine told her that when she was growing up, uh, her name for uh, the name her family and her community had for uh, pythons was Tok Batik, which is literally uh, Uncle Batik. Batik as in the sort of fabric pattern
Okay.
because of the skin of the animal. And so it was honorific because um, you don't want to disrespect the creature. And so they're named like Pak Belang is also another one for like Uncle Stripes for
Mm-hmm.
the tiger. And these sort of animals from a sort of Western or sort of rational worldview, it's like these are animals. These are entirely different from us. But I think in the folklore of this region, it's like no, like they are like the god in the tree and the king on the hill. Uh, it's another entity to live with. So how do you live with a tiger is the same question you'd have as how would you live with a demon, and it's the same again of how would you live with your local chief. It's yeah. So I guess where that kind of thing is coming from, which you've made an observation of, is yeah it's about making the animal or the natural world a character or a sort of full figure. Uh,
So let me ask you just a couple more questions I want to, and then see if there's anything else you want to talk with us about. Uh, is there anything in terms of RPG gaming or projects or related things that you're seeing out there that you're excited about, that you're looking forward to, maybe Kickstarter projects or something that you've seen published? I know we're seeing more diverse creators have access to Kickstarters in different ways. Is there anything you want to point to or give a shout out to?
like in terms of sort of other creators from this part of the world.
Sure.
Yeah. I always recommend the work of Robertson Sondo Jr., uh, who is sort of East Malaysian creator who's making sort of like small games in sort of D6. He lives in a sort of more rural area where it's difficult to get funky sided dice. And he is, as far as I know, the only creator to have made a game in Bahasa Melayu, the Malay language, uh, obviously RPGs are very Anglo-centric sort of pastime, and this is especially true in Southeast Asia and where the English language is a class marker. So I'm always really try to outwork by creators like Robertson because they're not in English. The Philippines, folks in the Philippines are doing so much great things. I have to, I like. Oh
I've put you on the spot here. I apologize for that.
No, it's hard because I can't quite recall his name right now because I only know him by his sort of Twitter handle. The person who does Mahalika and Gubat Banwa.
Oh yeah.
I'm so bad at this.
I know. I'll find the name and put it in the notes. But I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a problem with having to relate to people via sort of the virtual world. He's like I'm Googling him right now.
Okay.
Makat Patang or Wax. Yeah, so he's like a single. He generally works like he does stuff by himself and working with artists, obviously. But he's made Karandun.
It's just so good.
And Gubat Banwa. So yeah, his work is really cool because I admire the sort of singular vision or singular perspective of single creator works. So and he just does so much.
Yeah, Karandun has such a voice throughout it that is really, really strong, and it was really fun to run.
And also, I think he's also substantially different from the work I make, or what I like to make in RPGs, because I think he does a lot of like really cool sort of mechanical design in terms of the games he makes. So, and that's quite a bit different from what I would do. So I also admire that. Yeah.
So what is your plan? Like what is your expected launch date for Reach of the Roach God? What are you hoping for?
We hope to launch the campaign in early November.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously it's hard. We're very nervous about it. But yeah, so November and ending in early December probably.
Okay. Anything else you want to say before we wrap?
Not really.
Okay, that's fair.
Follow our Kickstarter like pre-launch page. Like please support us. Like there is a lot riding on this project. So yeah, like any support would be much appreciated.
The mock-up is really striking that you have for it. It really looks like, I love that color and the design choices there.
We chose that sickly sort of yellowish slash we chose that sickly yellowish color because I thought it'd be, the closer we get it to like the roach color, it would be like, so both Manka and I hate, like we are really afraid of roaches. And when we first started this project, we wanted to write something about caves, and fell into roaches because I think Manka just got into a peak and like started drawing roaches because he found them really gross, and like you should tack into the thing that gives you the strongest reaction, I guess, and that's one of the ways you make art. So yeah, now I always have a page open about like what do roaches smell like, or how do their mouths look, and it's always gross. Like Sharon walks by my monitor and says, That's disgusting. Why do you keep doing this? Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much for talking with us, and I appreciate you putting up with the weird technical issues, and really love your stuff.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay. Ah, I'm so